Excuse me. I was wondering, do people ever ask you if you look like Elvis Stojko?
I get that all the time.
Yeah? That's kind of interesting.
It's kind of weird, yeah? It's because it's me.
Oh, is it you?
Yeah, it's me.
Oh, well, in that case, welcome to the Crossroads. I'm going to talk with Elvis in a few moments. Well, it's nice to have bumped into you here in the lovely little village or town of Komox. So what are you doing on the West Coast?
Well, we're getting ready for a local club show at the Komox Figure Skating Club, and we were here a couple years ago through Greg Ledre, who runs the figure skating school, and we had a break last year. We were in Gibson's, and now they invited us back for 2 more shows on Saturday. So we're really pumped. It's going to be fun.
Well, that's exciting. You know, I remember probably one of the people that inspired me to like watch a little more figure skating was actually you. Do people say that very often, or?
I still get it a lot. I mean, it's funny. There's people out there, they'll come up to me and say, "Hey man, what are you doing? Are you still skating?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm still doing shows." And they're like, "We don't watch it anymore since you left." And I'm like, "What?" And like, you brought me into skating. You had a different style. It was just you just did it differently. And actually it feels really good because I've had such a sort of, I was like the black sheep within the sport. So to have that support it reaches beyond just the regular fans, and I still get that. We'll be out somewhere and people bump into me and talk skating and say, "Hey, you know, we haven't seen you in so long, but we used to watch," you know. So it's nice to have that. It just sort of you know, gives me that extra little bit of sort of pat on the back from all the years of doing it, and it reached further than you think. It reaches further than you think, which is great.
One thing I wanted to ask you, and like looking at your record and everything that you've accomplished, all those medals and awards and everything else that you've accomplished, can you look back at those as a landmark or as a hurdle? What, you know, is an accomplishment landmark or as a hurdle? How do you look back at those?
I think of them as accomplishments. All the hurdles that I ended up going through, or we end up going through, you know, in sport, is just sort of a roadblock that's blocking you from your goal, and you got to figure out a way to get around it. It's all problem solving, and you're only as strong as your main weakness in what you're doing. So learning all those things and figuring out your weaknesses and strengthening them and getting rid of those weaknesses make you stronger, and they get you closer to your goal. And then there's awards and landmarks and things like that you get on the side. And I tried not to get caught up with those awards and so forth, the medal. I mean, you want to be number one, of course. You're always focused on that. But along the way, you learn so much along that path that ends up being more valuable in the long run in life, especially now at my age, looking back and seeing all those things that I've learned I'm applying now to my other career in acting and focused on that, and all those things are going to help me more than just winning a medal or getting an award. But you know, the pat on the back's nice, but it's the experience that you gain and what you learn about yourself through those tough experiences that really matter. So I mean, it's great to have that pat on the back, but you know, the roadblocks, they're really important to understand your strengths, your weaknesses, how strong you are, if you can get through them, and your problem-solving abilities toward your goal, and which leads right into my career now with acting. It's the same thing again, same formula, slightly different skill. Performance is performance, but I still use those skills that I learned in skating.
So when you reach a certain point and you find that, you know, you've been awarded this medal or this honor, it's not really sort of like, okay, I gotta do better, or it's gonna hold me back, or it's gonna. So that's cool to know, because that's one thing I find when you have, you know, there's your personal best, as they say, and your personal goals, and then there's competition. On a scale or sort of maybe percentage, what is your personal, viewpoint of how much you're doing it for yourself and how much you're doing it for competition when you're doing, like, say, in the days of competition when you're doing competition?
Oh, I mean, it's got to come from yourself, from your inner passion and your own goal setting, right? And it's got to be yours. You got to take ownership of it. When I do seminars, work with kids, the biggest thing I teach them is you've got to take ownership of it. Your coach is not going to do it for you. Your parents are not going to do it for you. Your best friend's not going to do it for you. It rests on your shoulders. But once you realize that and take ownership of it, you start to learn aspects of yourself, your shortcomings, your strengths, and not to be afraid of any of that, because some kids get, they're afraid of success sometimes too, or afraid of failure, but afraid of success is a big one too, because it comes responsibility. So there's all those linked together, but I mean, it comes down to a point of really wanting it for yourself. Of course, your country's there. You're representing Canada, the flag. Gladys representing her country of Mexico. There's that pride involved, but the real source has to be internal. It can't be an external source of inspiration, because then it only lasts for so long. It fires out and it peters out. If it comes from an internal source and an internal place of wanting to achieve, it goes beyond just the material, and that'll constantly drive you towards your goal on those days where you wake up in the morning and you don't want to go to the rink and you feel awful, but there's this little spark in there going, no, this is worth it. This is what I want, and it gets you out of bed, and it gets you at the rink at 5:30 in the morning when it's cold and your body doesn't want to do it, and it drives you. And to this day, I used that spark, and where that spot is inside, not externally, but inside.
So you're mentioning acting. What do you do with acting now?
I've been doing it for a while. I mean, the big ones, like I was on, Chicago, played Billy Flynn in Chicago. Yeah, my dad was a singer, so I learned from him when I was younger. There's a little school that when I was from grade, I guess 1 to 8, there was a school in Newmarket, Ontario, and I was there from grade 5 to 8, and every year he would put on, one of the teachers would put on a play. He used to write music, and the whole school would be involved in these plays, and I used to love being on stage and singing. And from there I ended up getting, cameo roles or other roles, small parts in films late 90s. And then I was asked to help out with a show, with a movie called Death to Smoochie with Danny DeVito and Robin Williams and Edward Norton. I had to double for Robin, and I loved working on the set. I had to teach him he couldn't skate, but I had to teach him the choreography. I doubled for Robin. I did the stunt work and loved being around that atmosphere. Ended getting the show Chicago, was on Grease on stage, was in New York for Chicago and also in Toronto. Then a movie called Ice Girls. I was 2 years ago? We did it 2 years ago, yeah, and we shot it in Ontario. It's on Netflix in the US. Family Channel Canada has it, and it's just been building. A short film I did a couple years ago, another horror film. I just filmed a feature, independent film. So it's building, going to school. I'm focused on the acting schools in Toronto with the LB Acting School and Pro Actors Lab and Milne Studios, constantly, training, and that's where my focus is becoming an actor.
Oh, that's exciting. Gee, I've been away 15 years and I've missed a lot. This sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, so some people even now that's been living here, you're acting now, and but yeah.
Well, I find that too, and just so you know, when I was in Istanbul, I acted in a Turkish horror film as well. So yeah, we're almost teammates in that regard.
Perfect.
So now you were living in Mexico for a while, and I'm going to introduce now Gladys, and I'll just say hello, Gladys. How are you doing?
Hola, ¿cómo estás? I'm very well, thank you.
Great, and so I have to ask the question now. So how did you two meet?
Skating.
You're a skater.
I am a skater, and we officially met like back in the 2000s when we were both competing in the same circuits, but it wasn't something that sparked anything. It was like, hi, hello, how are you? I'm Gladys, I'm Elvis, okay, bye. We took a picture and then that was it, right? It was just somebody we just met at a little gala after a competition, and then many years after, fast forward, back in 2009, I was living outside of Mexico, and he was living in Mexico. But I had no clue because I was working with Disney on Ice, so I was touring, and I came home just to visit my family, change my clothes, and then go back on tour. And in one of those pockets, there was a competition in the local town, and Elvis was there as a coach. and I stepped in the venue, like I opened the door of the venue, and there he was warming up one of the kids, and I was like, this is so weird. Like, this is Monterrey, this is a little town in Mexico, and he's here. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So then it took us the whole night to figure it out, like, you know, what was he doing there? Why was he living in Mexico? Because just like you, I've been outside of my country for a long time, so I was a little bit lost in what was going on. So I couldn't understand what was happening until after later that night that I got a chance to talk to him. He's like, well, I've been living in Mexico for a few years now. And I'm like, where have I been? Yeah. But from there on, he asked me out on a date, we went out, and then a year later we were married. It was just really simple and quick, and it just worked. Yeah.
That's great. Do you ever compete on ice with different things when you're skating?
Well, I'm his choreographer, so we do challenge each other. Like, I'll do a step, and he's like, because I move very differently than him. So then choreographically is a challenge because maybe my legs are longer, or I can do a little bit more flexible things, but then he has more power. So some of my steps, he's like, I can't do it. Well, I'll work on it. Or some of his steps, I'm like, how do you do that? It's so fast. And then I cannot do it. So we kind of like, it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's never really a competition because we don't compete against each other. But we do end up creating some really cool things because we come from two different worlds, right? Yeah.
That sounds really interesting, because I know that with, you know, some people I've met in music who have worked in different countries or from different countries, like some, you know, percussionists from Turkey went to Sweden and New York and created the world beat jazz fusion, and meeting that person is kind of cool, and so bringing together, I don't know if there are different styles, or if it's pretty like classical music where you learn all the same moves, or is it different between like Canada and Mexico, between skating styles? Either of you can answer.
Yeah, well, back in the 90s, it was like, oh, that's the Russian technique, and that's the American technique, and that, like, it was very divided. But now it's like a melting pot, like, because coaches travel around and the kids go and train like in different countries, so kind of all the techniques are like kind of blended into one. So it's not so much of a difference of like, oh, you study classical music and then you skate to the beat of something else. It's just a personal style, and maybe the influence of your coaches and who you have working with you directly. But nowadays there's kids, especially we see it all the time. We skate at Richmond Hill, and there's the Japanese team comes and gets their programs, and then the Chinese team, and then the Italian girls come, and then so you have people from all over the world coming to work with the skaters that we have in with the coaches that we have in Canada. So then they take whatever they learn, and then they start teaching it in other countries. So it's really neat to see that. It's like just a little melting pot everywhere.
Right. Okay. The next question is for Elvis. Elvis, who's the better skater?
I never did a quad.
Well, that's a jumping ass. Well, the jumping. The thing is, there's certain skills that Gladys has that are just like, some of her spins I can't do. Like, she got beautiful camel spin and other flexible spins that are amazing. Her spread eagle, which I can't do. My legs don't open that way. My legs, I don't have flexible hips, which actually helped me in the jumping department. So powerful explosion for certain jumps and certain explosive techniques and skills I have an advantage to. I mean, there's different things too, like going on shows and touring. Her style of touring that she did after she stopped competing, a little bit different than for me. Like when I did Stars on Ice or Champions on Ice, I play myself. So I pick a program and choreographically set it up and go. Where she was playing characters, whether it be Mulan or Jasmine or Pocahontas, or more theatrical stuff, and then there'd be a choreographer there choreographing the whole thing as a structure and all of that. It's different caricature and character pieces, so it's a different style of skating in regards to that. We both have our strengths, both have our weaknesses. We're always helping each other, but I think like on days where she's working on her jumps, I'll come up and what's really nice too, sometimes when a husband and wife, if one's trying to teach the other, the classic is the guy trying to teach the woman how to drive stick. It becomes an argument at the end. no matter what. It never really does with us. We work really well as a team, so I could come up in the middle. She could be thinking something, and I'll just come by and I'll say, just give you a note, try this, boom, and then I just leave and let her do her thing. And if we're working on, you know, footwork or something, yeah, sometimes I get a little frustrated with some things because I can't do it the way she's doing it, but then we try to figure out a way that it works for my style. Because when I did my choreography and work with Ushi Kessler and the choreographers I worked before, it was all about sort of doing a lot of improv and then picking out what my movement was, what my natural movement was, instead of trying to do something that's
like
not
forced upon you.
Yeah, forced upon. I always call a lot of choreographers like body snatchers, because they'll take you and then choreograph what they impose, where I come from a different point of view of trying to figure out how the body, your own body, comes from. And Gladys, I mean, they impose a lot of stuff on her. Now the thing about her, she's so chameleon-like, she can adapt to things. I can adapt in different ways, but for movement, for motion, it's a little bit different for me. So she had to try to learn how I moved, and then we would be able to figure out stuff, and then she'd incorporate different things that I wouldn't have thought of, and then it starts to come out naturally. But working as a team, I think, is the biggest thing. Yeah, there's some days that are frustrating. It ends up being like that because it's always problem solving and figuring things out. But because we spend so much time together and we're best friends, the way we feel and the other person is the most important, rather than just the job itself. So we get the job done, but we're always very respectful of each other, and I think that's why it works so well.
We spend a lot of time together. Like we were mentioning that we do like around 60 to 70 shows in the winter in a matter of what, like 2 months, 7 weeks. So we get to the venue and we're there for 10 hours a day, every day, for 60 days. So it can be tough, and you have a team of more people. No, it's not only us.
Yeah.
But you gotta find the balance, because you live together, and then we come to work, we work together, and then we leave work, and then we go home together. Yeah. So it's like we're always together. So we have to have a very good friend-based relationship to be able to carry that around. Because if something doesn't work at work, we can't bring that home, because then we're going to be fighting all day until tomorrow that we can fix it back at work. And we tend to just leave work at work and home at home, and we have like those two separate lives, and that's how we've been managing for the last 8 years now.
It's great. It's very exciting. I'm going to go back a little bit to when you're talking about teaching, and I have a big part of me that I love to mentor, and in my work that I do, and I have taught for many years as well in my crafts, and I think that's something that you do. And is part of your visit here going to be involved with any of that with the Komox Valley Skating Club?
Not for here. We did a seminar in Parksville last year, and some of the skaters from up here went down and attended the seminar, which was great. We both taught there. Sometimes it'll work out where I just did a seminar and a show back to back in Prince Edward Island. Showed up there, did a full day seminar, then the next day did the show. Here it worked out that it was just strictly for 2 shows they did on the Saturday, which we're going to be doing. Sometimes it works out that you do both, sometimes it doesn't. So a couple of the kids, they remember taking the seminar in Parksville, and they're from here. So yesterday, even on the ice, one of the girls was there, and I gave her a few tips, because she goes, "Oh, I'm doing better with my double flip and so forth, but I'm still having trouble with this." And then I came by, I gave her a couple of tips and helped her out from an extension of what I taught last year. So it depends on the city, but here we're just doing the shows.
But we do teach seminars, not necessarily only in Canada. Last year we were in Mexico for a full week, and it was really intense, and it was so much fun. We were stationary in one club, and kids from all over Mexico came. We had around like 60 kids to teach for the whole week in between both of us. So it was like off ice, on ice, theater stuff, edge stuff, jump stuff. So it was like bouncing it in between me and Elvis, and then some privates. We were cooked. It was hard work for 1 week, but it was worth it. Yeah.
there's a totally different thing. People don't realize when it comes to teaching that, you know, you can be good at something, but teaching it is a whole other aspect of how to explain what you're doing. And when you started skating, what sort of, what was the motivation from the people who taught you? What was the sort of, what was the inspiration?
Yeah, I've had so many coaches over the years, from when I started to when I retired from competition. I learned every step of the way. I learned something. It's kind of like with what I'm doing with acting. I'm working with a bunch of different top-level instructors and just grabbing what I need from each one. And I mean, it just you end up just trying to figure out what you need. At the beginning, you're just taking in information, and then as you start to know yourself, you start realizing, oh, that's linked with that, and that's linked with that, and you start to pull what you need. But then you also learn more about yourself along the way, right? But it's you know, even now I still learn. Like it was one of those things where my martial art instructor Glenn Doyle, he always said, if you know it, you can teach it. So we would always be in a kung fu class, martial art class. We would learn some new techniques, and then when he thought it was ready, he would get you in front of the class and goes, okay, you were doing this section, now you're going to teach it. And they're like, and you just get kind of put on the spot. Now I was teaching when I was younger, so I didn't feel as on the spot. I found it very natural for me to explain and teach, so I felt pretty comfortable up there. And then, you know, he would sort of watch the coaching of it, and then if there's an adjustment, if someone would make a mistake in teaching, he would just adjust it, just like his instructor was teaching him, and that's how it's passed down. So I use that, you know, sort of, if I'm doing a martial art class, which is a cross training for the kids in a seminar, I'll have one of them come up or, you know, if I'm teaching, I'll say, okay, do you know this? Okay, I want you to call it out now. You know, if it's a push, punch, kick technique, okay, now you're going to call it out. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you're going to call it out and do it. And it makes, your brain goes in a different mode. As you know, when you're teaching it, you actually learn when you're teaching. And that's what I love doing. Yeah. And you always try to figure out the link in what you're doing. If it's something you've done since you were a kid, and like skating was that main thing, and whatever was outside I was always trying to find this similar link between them. And you can take and learn from. You're always trying to do that because you've got your goals. You're trying to advance. So you're trying to take whatever your experience is. You try to take and use it. Whether you're learning to be a pilot, the way your philosophy is, because you've done it for so long, you try to pull from other places. If you're doing interviews or whatever, like I approach it this way or whatever. It all becomes one big melting pot of knowledge, and you use it when you need it. And that's the great thing about it. And that's what I like about cross training, is it wasn't just strictly working out for working out's sake to be in shape. Doing different activities, you learn body structure, technique, and then you have this big melting pot of knowledge that you can use for pretty much anything.
That's great. Gladys, I'm going to ask you about we talked a little bit about it, but the transition of being from living in different countries, working in different countries. How does that affect your the motivation? And like, I know we're talking about, you got to get up, you got to do it, but are there different places that you've traveled that has different sort of criteria on how you perform?
Well, the intention is always to give the best in every performance, but yes, there are cities that might be more special than others, or that have a personal significance, or you've been there before because maybe you had a competition and you did very well, so you have very good memories. So every time you go back there, there's like you want to do it even better than your usual. But yes, I've had some cool experiences when we were touring, and if I remember correctly, we were somewhere in Asia. I can't be very specific, but we had like a princess, some sort of princess coming to see the show. And in that specific show, because there's a scene of like love, princess and princess, you hug and you hold hands, and sometimes you kiss, like if there's a Sleeping Beauty and the prince has to come and wake her up with a kiss. We had to change the show because you couldn't hold hands. You couldn't have any emotions of physical contact with your partner, right? Like, So it was very different playing, and we played in Cairo. I played in Russia. I've played in, you know, some countries that is not just your regular Canada, Mexico, the U.S., which is like America. When you get out of there and you have to kind of adjust to the culture of the specific country, you learn a lot. It is very shocking sometimes. Like that specific show, it was like, try not to do eye contact. Oh, and then we couldn't look at the princess. Like we normally perform towards the crowd, but wherever that area she was sitting, I guess you cannot do like eye contact. So it was like, you're performing, but then you can't look. So it's so tricky to adjust to certain,
Before we wrap up, I'm just going to ask, so for me, like Canada, ice skates, you know, it's, you know, as people say, you know, Canadians are born with ice skates, but
Pretty much.
but Mexico, what got you into skating?
The heat. The heat. I don't like being outside and sweating, just walking around. Like the city that I'm from, it's very humid. So in the shade, you can be 25 degrees and you're sweating. You take a shower and you're changing and you're sweating. You just want to jump back in the shower. It can be really hot. So as a kid, you always want to be outside. And my father used to race cars. So at home, it was like everybody has to pick a sport. You don't have to be a competitor. You just have to practice a sport. And in school, they teach you know to play soccer and basketball and running and all of that. But I didn't like that outside. I was like, exercise outside, that's a no-no. So then one of my neighbors had a birthday party. And it was at a skating rink. So it was like, eat cake, you know, have fun, here's a pair of skates, go skate for a few hours. And I fell in love with it. It was like, okay, it's a sport, it's in a freezer, you know, I'm not sweating. This is for me, and that was it. I was sold. I'm like, yeah, I like it, yeah.
Wonderful to know. I'm glad that you've shared all this wonderful information with me today. So Elvis, thank you so much for being on the show, and Gladys, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll take it from there. And thanks again. Enjoy your time out on the West Coast. I'm sure everyone's happy. And whenever I was told a few people that they asked me, what am I doing this week? I said, well, I'm going to be interviewing Elvis Stojko. So this is going to be a really popular show. Any last words?
I want to move here.
She loves the Rock Islands. Oh yeah, we love
I love the mountains. Where I'm from, it's called the City of the Mountains, and where we live in Ontario, it's a little bit flat. Yeah. So I do miss the mountains, and I'm looking forward to, after an interview, I'm going to go for a walk and take some pictures and have a coffee and just see if I can see some animals. I love animal photography, so I always carry my camera, and being outdoors is the best. Yeah.
For everybody out there on the other side of the lens, I'm Martin Anthony. Thanks for watching Martin at the Crossroads. Martin at thecrossroads.tv is how you reach me. And thanks to Shaw for being the best people on the planet to help me do this. Thanks. Bye-bye.